Okay, so last week we talked about the Lord's Supper. We talked about the timing of that and the washing of the feet. And then as it goes down to 15, he says, if I, sorry, let's go to 13, or no, let's go to 12. So when he had washed their feet and taken his garment and reclined at the table again, he said to them, "Do you know what I have done to you?" Now, the interesting thing here is that, and we talked about this last week, that there were several arguments of the disciples on who would be the greatest in the kingdom. And I think later on here, there's kind of this argument that happens again. But when they're reclining at the table, it was customary that somebody would wash the feet. Usually there were servants to do that. Evidently, there wasn't a servant there to do that. And generally, it would fall upon the youngest to do that. And the youngest probably would have been John. So that is kind of interesting because this is his gospel. But it says, and so when he had washed their feet and taken his garment and reclined at the table again, he said to them, "Do you know what I have done to you? You call me teacher and Lord, and you are right, for so I am. If I then, the Lord and the teacher, washed your feet, and also you also ought to wash one another's feet, for I gave you an example that you should do as I did to you." So Christ is establishing here what Christian leadership looks like. And I think that this is super important to look at. To be a leader is to be a servant. To be a leader is to put yourself last. That's not what we see in a lot of churches today. It's not what we see in the world. But that's the example that Christ gave us. The pastors should be those who serve the most and put themselves last. And it's the same thing if you're a husband. If you're a husband, if you're a husband, you are the head of the family. But what does that mean? It says that in Ephesians, the husband is the head of the family as Christ is the head of the church. Well, what did Christ do? Well, Christ gave his life for the church. Christ served the church. Christ put himself last and put the church first. So as a husband, as a father, your mission is to be the servant of your family. You put yourself last and you put your family first. That's not something we commonly see in our culture today either. But Christ is trying to set an example for the disciples because they're going to be leading the church. And he doesn't want them to be the type of leaders that the world sees as leaders are, elite, above the law, above the rules, but though that the leader would be, in a sense, the lowest, putting themselves at a low position to serve others. And that's how you lead. You lead by being a servant, not by having everyone else serve you. And that there's a big difference in that. And Christ is trying to show them that example because they didn't understand that. It goes on in verse 16, it says, "Truly, truly, I say to you, a slave is not greater than his master, nor is one who is sent greater than the one who sent him. If you know these things, you are blessed if you do them. A master, nor one who is sent greater than the one who sent him." So Christ is sending out his disciples. They are the ones being sent. And he's trying to get them to understand the necessity of them to go as servants. And he's led the way by giving them that example of being a servant leader, his entire ministry. He never put himself first. I do not speak of all of you. I know the ones I have chosen, but it is that the scripture may be fulfilled. He who eats my bread has lifted up his heel against me. From now on, I'm telling you before it comes to pass, so that when it does occur, you may believe that I am he. Truly, truly, I say to you, he who receives whomever I send receives me, and he whoever receives me receives the one who sent me. So now he's beginning to allude to this issue of betrayal. And he says, the only reason why I'm telling you this ahead of time is so that you realize that I'm in full control. This is not a surprise to me. The day that Jesus picked Judas to be one of his 12, he knew he would be the one to betray him. He knew that. But that was part of the prophecy that needed to be fulfilled. When Jesus had said this, he became troubled in spirit and testified, saying, truly, truly, I say to you that one of you will betray me. The disciples began looking at one another at a loss to know of which one he was speaking, which says a few things. One, they didn't trust themselves. So that does show, I think, a presence of humility in them, that they didn't see themselves above that. And the other thing it says is that they never suspected Judas. For whatever reason, he was very convincing. They would never suspect him as being the one to do that. There was reclining on Jesus' bosom one of his disciples whom Jesus loved, which is John, the one who's writing this gospel. So Simon Peter gestured to him and said to him, tell us who it is of whom he is speaking. Now, this is interesting because Simon Peter, I think by this time, well, maybe not. Simon, well, we'll go on before I add that in. He was leaning back on Jesus' bosom and he said to him, Lord, who is it? And Jesus then answered, that is the one whom I shall dip the morsel and give it to him. So when he had dipped the morsel, he took it and gave it to Judas, the son of Simon Iscariot. Now that taking the bread and dipping it in the juice of the meat and then giving it to someone was a gesture, a cultural gesture of great friendship. So this just wasn't, oh, Jesus saying, okay, this is the sign. That gesture of dipping the bread in the morsel and then giving it to someone was an act of saying you are a beloved friend. And Judas took that knowing full well of what he was planning to do. So then John must have known by this time that it was Judas who was going to betray Christ. He took and gave it to Judas, the son of Simon. After the morsel, Satan then entered into him. Therefore, Jesus said to him, what you do, do quickly. Now, this is kind of interesting because it doesn't say that a demon entered into Judas. It says Satan entered in to Judas. Now, Satan is not God. God is everywhere all at once, all the time. Satan is a created being. He's not omnipresent. Satan can only be at one place at one time. So when I hear some of these televangelists say they had this face-to-face encounter with Satan, I'm like, yeah, right, you're crazy. Demons, however, there's a lot of them, but Satan himself can only be one place at one time. And the reason why I'm bringing that up is for two reasons. One, I do think that we need to understand that a lot of people view Satan as being, there's Satan and there's God and then there's Satan. They're the two big, no, that's not a proper theological perspective. There's God and then there's Satan. There's God and then there's Satan. Okay, Satan is a created being. In fact, when he's thrown in hell, God doesn't even do it. He has two other angels go and throw him in. So it's important to understand that this is not like there's two big powers in the universe, God and Satan. No, there's only one, God. Satan is a created being. But the fact that Satan here is personally entering Judas says a few things. One, that this betrayal of Judas is a one-time historical event. And the reason why I say that is that all of us mess up in a lot of different ways. And the devil would like to tell you, oh, you're just like Judas. And we know that because even the disciples were like, oh, is it me? Is it me? Is it me? We have to understand that the betrayal of Judas is a very singular prophetical event that happens during this time. It's not a common thing. It's a one-time historical occurrence, which is why I think the responsibility weighs so heavy on Judas, because he walked with Christ for 3 years. After the morsel, Satan then entered into him, and therefore Jesus said to him, what you do, do quickly. Now, no one of those reclining at the table knew for what purpose he had said this to him. For some were supposing because Judas had the money box that Jesus was saying to him, buy the things that we have needed for the feast. Oh, hold on. Remember we talked about the timing, that we all think that Jesus washed the disciples' feet at the Lord's Supper? Well, hold on. They all thought Judas was going out to buy food for the Passover. So this isn't the Last Supper here. Because when the Last Supper is recorded, Judas isn't there. Where is he? He's out betraying Christ. So after receiving the morsel, he went out immediately, and it was night. Therefore, when he had gone out, he said, now is the Son of Man glorified, and God is glorified in him. If God is glorified in him, God will also glorify him in himself, and will glorify him immediately. Little children, I am with you a little while longer. You will seek me, and as I said to the Jews, now I also say to you, where I'm going, you cannot come. So here, Christ is beginning to get them ready for his departure. And this is not what they expected. They expected the Messiah to raise an army and to be a literal king, in it, which Christ will do, but not now. That's at the second coming, he does that. A new commandment I give to you, that you love one another, that you hold on. And yeah, a new commandment I give to you, that you love one another, even as I have loved you, that you also love one another. By this all men will know that you are my disciples, if you have love for one another. So what should be the main sign of the church? It should be our love for one another. That is how the world is going to recognize the church, by our love for each other. I don't know how well we're doing in America these days with that. Simon Peter said to him, Lord, where are you going? Jesus answered, where I go, you cannot follow me now, but you will follow me later. So you can't go now, but you will go later. Peter said to him, Lord, why can I not follow you right now? I will lay down my life for you. And Jesus answered, will you lay down your life for me? Truly, truly, I say to you, a rooster will not crow until you deny me 3 times. So Peter is always very confident in his own flesh. But just like when he got out on the boat, he was able to walk on the water as long as his eyes were on Christ. But as soon as his eyes were not on Christ, he sank. Then later we find out that he does deny Christ 3 times in public, which, has a big effect on him. Peter always does really well when he's with Christ and doesn't do so well when he's without him. That should be kind of the same story for all of us. So that, boy, I really kind of plowed through. Let's stop and do some questions there. And if we go to 14, we can do that. But I covered a lot of verses there in a very short amount of time. Surely there's questions. Surely.
Yeah, I think we got as far as verse 29, but I think we went beyond that.
What? No, we're at verse 38.
Yeah, 38. Tony, what is that term that they use to compare and saying the God versus Satan? What is that term? Not dichotomy. You know what I'm talking about, right?
Yeah, I do, and now I can't remember.
Yeah, and the reality is not like that, right? Because God is infinitely more powerful than Satan. But in the world, they tend to want to make this good versus evil, right? Good versus evil kind of thing.
Well, you have certain theologians that believe in what's called the openness of God.
Mm.
And they believe that basically what they believe is God is not perfect. He's learning. And that God and Satan are engaged in a universal chess game, in which God could lose. And so this whole theology called the openness of God, which is just, it's anti-biblical. It's not, it's not a biblical concept of who God is. And it allows, what it does is it opens the way for people to question the authority of God and question the authority of Scripture. Open theism.
Mhm.
Okay, openness, open theism. This is the same as Greg Boyd, right?
Ah, Mr. Boyd.
Yes.
Yeah, I wrote a paper on Mr. Boyd, and it wasn't complimentary.
Yeah, I can imagine.
So I don't know if that came up before, Christian, here, but I was just curious if Judas, was that free will? Did he have free will at any point in time, or everything was prophesied, it had to happen this way? Or was there a moment when he decided to do it? And then when Satan was in him, of course, I guess he had no choice anymore, because he really regretted it afterwards, right? He did regret what
He did. The interesting thing is that both him and Peter regretted or
Yeah.
had remorse of what they did. But where Peter went to Jesus to reestablish the relationship, Judas would rather hang himself than
Mm.
come to Christ. Judas could have sought Christ out.
Yeah. I see.
So, but then again, there is this, going back to Romans 9 and 10, the whole issue of God allowing people just to go their own way.
Mm-hmm.
Judas was a greedy person from the beginning,
Mm-hmm.
and he just continued in his greed. And he saw being a disciple as a chance to further his greed and his power. And when it became evident that that wasn't going to happen, he decided to sell Christ out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And is it true where he hung himself today? This is still an open field where no one is building anything in Jerusalem, right? It's still.
Well, no, he hung himself on a cliff.
Oh. Mm-hmm.
And his basically his body separated from his head,
Mm-hmm.
and the body fell to the cliffs below and splattered everywhere, where the Bible says his bowels gushed out.
Mm-hmm.
But he threw the money back at the Pharisees, and the Pharisees took the money and bought a field to bury poor people in. And I think whether today that field is still an empty field, I don't know. Maybe I'm familiar with that. Could be a potter's field, they call it.
What is it called again?
A potter's field.
Potter's field.
Hey, Tony, do we actually know where that is? I mean,
I don't know. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know how they would know where that is, but who knows? There's a lot of stuff in Israel, and if you ever go to Israel, which I have, there's a lot of guesswork that's done because they can make money from tourism. This is where Jesus had a cold one day, and he blew his nose right here on this street corner. So there's a lot of that kind of stuff that goes on. Trying to guess where the crucifixion happened, big debate on that. That kind of stuff. So,
well, I know what some places we know, some places we're not sure. I had a tour guide who said, okay, the tour guides will tell you this, but we don't actually know that.
Yeah, it's just like,
or this one, we do know this one, but like Simon, where Paul stayed after he had his road to Damascus experience, there's a place with a sign saying this is where he stayed, but they don't know. They just made that up.
when I was in Joppa, this is Simon the Tanner's house where Peter had his. Okay, maybe, I don't know.
It's kind
Do
of
we
a
know
beat.
where the last supper, where that happened? Do we know that for sure?
They're pretty sure that they're pretty sure where that is.
There was
Uh,
some debate that it was more a big hall versus
Yeah,
a small setting,
yeah,
right?
yeah, it's funny because they have the Christians, the Coptic Christians, and they all kind of share responsibility of, it's weird. The whole weird thing they got going there, but
Hmm.
I went to Bethlehem. That was an interesting place.
Yeah, the grotto where the supposedly the manger was.
Well, the manger, it was when it said they looked for room at the inn, but they said you can go ahead and stay in the manger or the whatever it was, the barn. What that is it's a cave underneath the
Mhm.
house.
Mhm.
And what they would do is they'd bring all the animals in at night, and the heat from the animals would rise and warm the house. So it
Mhm.
acted not only as a shelter for the animals, but also as a way to heat and keep the house warm.
Mm.
That's pretty interesting. So that's most likely, if you're looking for a place where Jesus was born, is going to be in some type of cave underneath a structure of some kind.
Mhm. Yeah, I
So,
remember going to that church, Church of the Nativity. You have to crouch down to get into that 12 pointed stars or whatever. Yeah,
yeah.
supposedly the location.